Welcome back to the Chaplaincy on the Go podcast. I am Josh Zorhoff, your host, and this podcast is brought to you in coordination with my good friends at Care Portal. Care Portal is a technology platform that helps families stay out of the foster care system by getting resources and needs that they have from local communities, from networks, and from churches. And so we're grateful for their partnership. We're also grateful for the Fearless Chaplaincy and their partnership as well, and the work that they're doing in the workplace to help people stay healthy and thrive emotionally and spiritually. And I am jacked for this conversation that we are going to have today. I got an email from a man named Benjamin Long. Dr. Long is a sleep doctor. You are a board certified pediatrician and sleep doctor, and you do work in sleep medicine. You're also a seminary student, which is cool. And you do a lot of work on basically helping people understand the impact of sleep and spirituality and how they come together. You're a professor, so you do lectures, and this is what you do. So Ben, I'm just super stoked to have you on the podcast.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that introduction. And I've been looking forward to it too.
Awesome. Hey, Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself, like your journey, your story a little bit, and where are you currently residing and all those things.
Yeah. Well, for me, sleep has always been not necessarily an issue. I've always had little moments where I go bump in the night. I was a terrible sleepwalker as a child. Luckily, I spared my parents from night terrors. Never really had that. So my child had that for me. So I experienced that as a parent.
Wow. Oh my word.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I could tell you, I slept walk downstairs out into the yard. On my 8th grade field trip to DC, I slept walk out of my hotel room. So
no.
Yeah. So sleep was a very prominent part in my childhood. And that didn't necessarily dictate me going into sleep medicine, but it certainly adds to it.
That is wild. My wife, she was a sleepwalker. One time, my in-laws, they found her in the yard on like a summer night, covered in dew with a blanket and a pillow, like legitimately sleeping in the grass.
Yeah. No, that trip to DC, I came to consciousness as I'm knocking on the door. And of course, it's they're like, if you're caught outside of your room, then we're sending you home. To add to this situation, I'm from a military family, so we had just moved to the area. So of course, long story short, I get caught because my roommate sleeps like he's dead and was not waking up to any of my knocking on the door. And I get caught and I'm crying and I'm I'm sleepwalking, and they call my parents. So luckily I didn't get sent home. They believed me, but yeah, it's definitely a story for the ages.
Wow. So how did you fall into sleep medicine when you were going through your work to become a doctor? What pricked that for you?
A little bit of self-preservation, if I'm totally honest. So I, from a very young age, wanted to be a pediatrician. My grandfather was a pediatrician in Columbus, Georgia. He was a huge figure in my life. And my dad was a minister, but also bivocational in the Air Force as well. People often ask, oh, so he's a chaplain? I was like, nope, he was a pilot in the Air Force, but he just, did both. And I like to tell people, I just kind of smushed them together. And that's kind of the career trajectory that I've taken.
I love that so much. And I read do you have a book? I got a book right here. I'm holding it up. We'll have the link to access the book on Amazon on the podcast as well in the show notes. But reading through this, looking at your bio, you're married. You have a child. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Oliver, he's 10 years old. I've been married for, I get in trouble. I'll say I've been married since 2013. That way I don't have to do any math and don't get in trouble.
I also have a 10-year-old. It is the greatest thing ever. 10 is all of the ages have been great. I find that a 10-year-old boy is about for me right now, as good as it's going to get. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's you finally like the humor and the joking and that kind of like relationship side of things is like growing each and every day. So it's definitely a major improvement. Although newborns are cute and cuddly, they don't have much of a personality.
No, it's such, you're so right. You're so right. It's so fun to see him becoming who he is. And I want to dive in here to a little of a combination of spirituality, mental health, sleep, how they interact. It is maybe this opening question. When you think about mental health and you think about sleep and you think about spirituality and accessing faith, what is most commonly misunderstood?
I think the biggest thing from my experience is just not making those connections. So as a sleep physician, I get a spiritual history with all of my patients and I ask them, is spirituality or religion an important part of your daily life? And so often I have people who say, yes, I'm a Christian, reading the Bible and prayer are important parts of my life. But then when I go that next step and say, okay, how do you call upon your faith when you are experiencing sleeplessness or insomnia? And then people look at me like I have a hole in my head. Like, what are you talking about?
Wow. So they're disconnected in people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that is, I find that is similar as a therapist with mental health, that people are like, yeah, God is a part of my life. The Bible's a part of my life. But when I'm like, okay, do you want to do some work on combining what's going on emotionally with your spirituality? A lot of it's like, why would I do that? Like it's almost like we keep things in boxes and we don't realize that there really is no box.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of this, I'm coming from an evangelical, grew up in a Baptist church. And I think some of it too is just the shift that Protestantism made way back in the day of having correct beliefs and orthodoxy. And unfortunately, in some ways, kind of uncoupled that from embodied practices. There were, feast days and fasting days. And they were like, nope, that's Catholic. We're not going to do anything with that. And so we kind of got away with it. And I think an unfortunate downstream effect of that is we lost a little bit of these kind of embodied practices that now science is catching up and realizing like, oh, hi, this is like really good for people's mental health and well-being.
Yeah. Like fasting is good for you. Taking silence and solitude is really good for you. It's not just a spiritual discipline. It's a good human discipline. And that I totally agree with you on that. I wonder if you could maybe help us understand what happens to the brain when we are chronically sleep deprived and what happens to our bodies when we are sleep deprived.
Yeah. So the easiest way to talk about this is with some of these kind of parts of the brain that correlate with certain aspects of our human experience. I always try to kind of like bring out to the forefront that we can pretty easily then try and separate the body and the soul. And you kind of can get a little meta too quickly and talk about like dualism and stuff like that. So I'd say those are two separate and interdependent things. Always to keep that to the forefront. But in general, when I'm talking about this, we think about your prefrontal cortex, that, front part of your brain that we know is associated with your executive decision-making, your future planning, your impulse control, and even really being able to self-regulate your thoughts and what you're feeling and experiencing. That is a critical area of the brain that's important for that. And so even just one night of sleep deprivation, you can think of it as, when we talk about like offline or online, that part of the brain becomes a little bit more offline. And then your parts of your brain that are more responsible for like your emotions, like your amygdala, that stuff gets more online and kind of ramped up. So you become more moody, you become more, or it's more difficult to control your impulses. And so that leads to, less governed by reason, more driven by impulse. And obviously, like, that's not like an all or nothing switch, and everyone is impacted by it differently. But then if you think about that over the course of years and years and years, compounding on that, that does have impacts on your body, your brain health. One of the more prominent things for your brain that we're seeing is actually when we're talking about development of like Alzheimer's or dementia. When you have sleep deprivation, some of those concerning plaques that build up on the brain happen because of sleep deprivation. And It's a bidirectional relationship. So getting adequate sleep kind of helps to undo that to some extent. But that is really a big misconception, is that people think, oh, I'll catch up on my sleep. I'll sleep when I'm dead or something like that. But we do know there is some amount of a cumulative effect. And, you can get to a point where you're not able to actually undo the damage that's been done.
I think, if nothing else, for people listening, the reality that you can't catch up on sleep is so critical.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've read the book Widen the Window by Elizabeth Stanley, but she's got a whole section in her book about sleep. And essentially, how do we, the book is all about how do we recover from stress and trauma, but her section on sleep essentially says if you are not regularly sleeping, one, you can't catch up on it when you miss it. And so just realize that if you're not regularly getting enough sleep, it's not only devastating to your emotional health, but your physical health. And she linked in some research that right now they're finding if you're not getting adequate sleep, that can actually be carcinogenic to the body because of the inflammation and all of that. And so like you can get cancer from not sleeping.
Yeah. Yeah. Which there's this line from my pathology book in medicine, and it pretty much says to the extent, pretty much anything in life done to excess can cause cancer, or done to deprivation can cause cancer.
Yes.
And yeah, like that's the really interesting thing about being an expert on sleep is it touches everything. And so if I'm talking to a cardiologist, I'm talking to a neurologist, I'm talking to, an endocrinologist, that we know that whatever state of health that you have, you just add sleep deprivation, that's going to worsen outcomes for a lot of chronic conditions, your immune system, like the list goes on and on and on.
When I work with clients who are working through depression, and some of our initial stuff, just in terms of homework, we talk about diet, we talk about exercise, and we talk about sleep. And I heard a long time ago from a mentor of mine that if our clients would eat, sleep, and exercise, they would see a reduction of their symptoms, and they might not even need to come back. Sometimes it's just about, what are you doing? Not even before because we can't talk about intrusive thoughts. We can't talk about your emotions. We can't get to combating some of that. If you don't have the executive function to actually do that work, it's going to be really, really hard. And
absolutely.
And it's interesting too, because you work with children, and talk a little bit about like when a child is tired and they have not gotten enough sleep. We typically look at them and like, oh, they're tired. Like it's okay. We recognize that when a child is tired, but why don't we do that with adults? Why when an adult is having a tantrum, because adults have tantrums, and maybe they're not fun to be around, why do we say something like, oh, they're a jerk, or whatever, instead of us just saying like, well, maybe they're like, are they tired? Yeah. Why do we make the shift with children so easily and we miss it with adults?
Right. I think we have less grace for adults than we do for children, and some of it, you think about that prefrontal cortex that's not fully developed until you're kind of your mid-20s.
Right.
So even more crucial for children because they have a developing brain for them to get the adequate sleep that they need. Yeah. When I'm teaching my pediatricians in training, one of the first things I say is sleep is the primary activity of life until 2 years old. More than eating, waking, walking, you can name any other activity. Sleep is the primary activity of life up to 2 years old. And yet so often, and that's how, before I became an expert in sleep, I was just like, oh, your kid's having some sleep problems. They'll grow out of it. It's fine. I didn't really have any kind of red flags in my head, because oftentimes that is true of the narrative. It does resolve on its own. But if you think of a standard kind of bell curve, most of the kids who come to my sleep clinic, they're not beyond that 95th percentile where they're definitely abnormal and I need to do something about it. But we very rarely talk about those kids who are in that sliver of the 90th to 95th percentile. Like, you're not average. You're not so far out here that there's something kind of concerning when I'm thinking about your brain development, but there's something going on that you're right here. And those kids very rarely are actually able to like grow out of it. Or it's going to self-resolve and kind of shift back to the middle.
Wow. Wow. So if you're a parent listening, this is something to take seriously. You really want to pay attention. This is a random question, okay, Ben, but I want to know your opinion on sleepovers. Because we call them not sleepovers. And so I am of the opinion that we should not have sleepovers unless we can make sure that the kids are going to go to bed at a good time. And I just want to know your opinion. Are those good?
Yeah. That's a great question. I have not been asked that before. Yes. I think certainly this gets to an interesting conversation within sleep medicine, and then the worldviews and kind of social imaginaries and philosophies or theologies that undergird our recommendations and things of that nature. And that sleep health, very strictly, I write it in my sleep study reports and things like that. You need to consistently get age appropriate sleep duration every single night, including weekends and holidays, and to extension sleepovers as well. Yeah. And so there's this tension of having that regularity, but then at the same time, there are moments in our lives where we are awake for good reasons, like for a sleepover, or, seeing a longtime friend that you haven't seen in a long time and you're just up and chatting and catching up, those moments where it's like, okay, there has to be somewhat of a balance here, because there are things that are going to feed our soul by being awake and having moments of, I'm not entering into the sleep that I quote unquote need. Yeah. But I'm fed or nourished in a different way. Yeah. So I would say, most of my hesitations, unfortunately, around sleepovers tends to more come around safety issues. And I've been blessed in that I both practice as a sleep medicine physician, but also as a general pediatrician for up to this point in my career. So I often will have conversations with families around that. And should we, shouldn't we, what do I need to think about? How do we need to ensure safety and things of that nature?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to just double down and say, I heard you say that consistent sleep is really important. And sleepovers are okay, but I do think, because that's one of the things, if you send your kid off to a sleepover, they didn't sleep, and they're going to be, just prepare yourself that the next day is going to be brutal. And you just have to, and I really appreciate it. Like, hey, you know what? There are things that we stay up for. I was up later last night with a friend that I haven't sat with for a really long time. And it was early this morning, and it was, honestly, I'm like, I'm tired, but it was hashtag worth it. Like, that was my first thought of like, totally worth it. And I appreciate the whole idea of, we might be starved in our sleep, but we might be filled in another way, whether that's spiritually or emotionally. So I appreciate that. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the work that you do, and, going through your sleep habits journal, how that came to be, and the work that you do in helping people unite their spiritual and emotional, and then, sleep elements of their lives.
Yeah. A big part of it came from what I was observing in my patients that I was serving. But then also a lot of it came just from my own journey of integration and wanting to be more faithful as a practitioner of medicine, but also as a Christian. I received an idea that the most faithful Christian physicians are those who go out and do medical missions, who share the gospel with their patients. And I still wrestle with that because I see the importance and the good, and obviously that is needed, I think, in our even in our current day. But if that is when God is most happy with me, then God's really not happy with me most of the time, or it in some way, I think diminishes the work of the day or these other parts of our lives. And I was really struggling with, okay, so how can I think differently about this, or have I received an accurate representation of who God is and kind of what he wants for me and what he's calling me to as a Christian physician. And so that led me to really think about, okay, how do I show up for my patients? Be aware of the dynamic that's at play, that I'm in a position of authority and privilege with my patients. So not abusing that as well. And then as I got into sleep, I couldn't help but notice that it felt like there was something missing. I was learning all of this amazing, beautiful stuff about the science of sleep and how our bodies work and the intricate, complex nature that we just think that sleep is this on-off switch that's really straightforward, when it's a multifaceted, complex cascade that's happening in our brains, and it's dynamic throughout the night as well. And so seeing the beauty of that, and yet I think there's a part of me that I felt drawn to reflecting on the experience of sleep. You go back to Augustine, and he was struggling with, am I not myself at that time, O Lord? And, thinking about how he acts in his dreams and why he acts away in his dreams when he doesn't act that way in real life. And is that him or is that not him? And then you fast forward to Billie Eilish singing, "When we all fall asleep, where do we go?"
Yeah.
And this experience part of dream makes scientists really uncomfortable, because experience is a very subjective part of reality. And I realized that this was an area of knowledge that the scientific method and a lab cannot easily talk about or reveal what's happening here. And I think that's really what led me to reading more in the Bible. And that's just, I think, my natural impulse as a Christian was, okay, if I'm accompanying my patients, I'm using all of these tools, their sleep isn't necessarily getting better. Am I missing something? And the same thing of how sleep science is taught to me, I just got curious. What does the Bible have to say about sleep? And turns out it's a lot.
Turns out it's a lot. Wow. Yes.
Yes. And so the Sleep Habits Journal was really my attempt to distill my findings and reflections within the context of responding to sleeplessness or insomnia. Because what I found was the cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is the best evidence-based treatment that we have to respond to sleeplessness. And a core component of that is what's called stimulus control instructions, which essentially is that, traditionally in medicine, sleep medicine, we say the bed is a place for sleep and for sex, and you don't want to do anything else there, because then that's sending other stimuli to your brain that are signaling that it's time to be awake. And so then you're actually just getting farther and farther of that being a place for sleep. And so that the instructions to keep the bed as a place for sleep. And then when I was reading through the Psalms and seeing this motif of how the psalmist responds to their struggles, and in Psalm, 4 is talking about meditating on their bed. And then on Psalm 6, it's talking about I'm flooding my couch with tears. And then in Psalm 77, you're holding my eyelids open. There's all of this picture of the psalmist still struggling at night and often saying things that I felt like I heard from my patients even now, thousands of years later. And so I was like, okay, there's something here. I'm seeing this thing in like both of these places, and there has to be some way to bring that together. And that was what I was trying to do with the journal.
Well, so, okay, I have so many questions. I have so many different places I want to go here. But one question I have is, are you saying that maybe integrating your spiritual practices into your bed, like reading your Bible in bed? I have a practice where I invite people to give God the first word and the last word of the day. Part of that is just, when you wake up, what is the first thing you're going to reach for? Are you going to reach for your phone? Are you going to reach for a book? Which I'm going to talk about social media and digital technology and how it messes up circadian rhythms. I want to talk about all of that. But, but I want, like, is it maybe, hey, yeah, sex and sleep, that's what the bed is for. Could the bed also be for your Bible?
Absolutely. And that is a point of contention I have with cognitive behavioral therapy as it's currently conceived and discussed about is there is this underpinning that prioritizes sleep and sex for the bed. And so I have seen even protocols in psychology, if people aren't aware, oftentimes those protocols will have scripts. This is an example of how the scenario kind of might happen. So I have seen scripts by the founders of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, where the person actually says, sometimes if I can't fall asleep, I just pray to God that he'll help me fall asleep, or I pray that I'll fall asleep. And the next line by the psychologist is kind of like, I know what you mean. And then they just kind of continue on past there. And I'm reading this, I'm like, what is happening? Like there's, like you're not getting a spiritual history. You're not going into this any further. And whether or not maybe the author, if I'm giving him some grace, he's just using it idiomatically and it was just kind of saying it like I just wish I could fall asleep kind of a thing. But I think it reveals this blind spot in that Christian practice has included nighttime prayers and bedtime prayers since the beginning.
Yeah.
And so if prayer was somehow a stimulus that was going to be antithetical to falling asleep, then I think we would see that more naturally, in Christians or religious individuals compared to people who are not religious. But that's a little bit more of just an anecdote.
I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. I think because what an opportunity of like, I pray to God before I go to sleep, or I pray so I can go to sleep. Well, I mean, my question would be, well, what are you praying? I mean, tell me more about that.
Right, exactly. And if you just think about it from a, physiology kind of perspective too, that I would think there is research that shows that there's something to the cognition or thought of God-mediated control that tends to promote better sleep quality compared to people who don't have that belief, which makes sense. If I believe that there is a creator of the universe who is sustaining all of the world, and I can trust that he is in control and I can let go, that's very different from I look out into the world and just see chaos and nothing, and I'm supposed to be out for 8 hours. That can, in certain situations, be really anxiety provoking for people.
So let me ask you, do you think that sleep is an act of trust?
Absolutely. Yeah. I often say that sleep is an embodied act of trust.
Wow.
That, when we think about God as creator and we think about sleep, that naturally becomes this creature creator distinction. And especially I see it very prominent in Genesis, in the narrative of Adam and his deep sleep and God. That's coming about in the narrative where God has finally said something is not good, that Adam is alone. And then in that process of bringing Adam, Eve, sleep is there. And so a similar pattern is seen with Abram, who goes on to be Abraham. It's something that's not good. He doesn't have descendants. And then God uses sleep as he is creating this covenant with Abraham for descendants. And so I see sleep as this important part of ordered creation that reveals to us my limitations. There are things that I literally cannot do. Like Adam and Abram and their own power would not have been able to, bring about the result that God wanted to bring about. And I think sleep is a way that we embody that vulnerability and that creatureliness and, in essence, that trust.
So sleep would be a intentional spiritual discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Man,
absolutely.
I love that. I'm glad you brought up Genesis, because as you're talking, there's something that occurs in the narrative in Genesis 1 and 2, and then later in 3, just in the whole idea of rest and all of that, which is beautiful. But in Genesis 3, it says that the Lord God comes down to the garden in the cool of the day and walks the garden in the cool of the day. Well, in the original language, that is meant to sound like a common thing, that God always comes down to meet with his people in the cool of the day. And then the question is, when is the cool of the day? Well, it's in the morning before the work begins and in the evening after the work is done. That there is something deeply rhythmic about meeting with God, resting in God as before the day begins and after the day is done, which is essentially when we're sleeping.
Yeah, absolutely. And that I quote a little bit in my book from Andrew Bishop, who coined this term theosomnia. So literally meaning God's sleep. And that's this idea that he's talking about, thinking about our sleep as being open to God, being blessed by God, and this real openness to revelation from God. And that oftentimes we talk about sleep, people immediately want to go to dreams. I can't tell you how many times I tell people I'm a sleep doctor and they're like, let me tell you about this crazy dream. And I'm like, oh, hold on. I'm not that kind of sleep doctor. I don't do dream interpretation or anything like that. But it's interesting. The research on dreams currently in the scientific literature is like, the thought is, oh, this is like a survival, self-preservation. We are trying to problem solve for things in the future that we need to be able to overcome. Yeah. And then you see what God reveals to his people in dreams in the Bible. I'm like, it's kind of the same thing. He's talking about something that is happening in the future. And, so it's always interesting when you see those little kind of parallels. But I think with dreams and sleep in and of itself, it is this time where the illusion of control is just totally gone. Sleep is one of those only things that you enter it by indirection. I don't prepare to have a meal and then eat by pretending to eat first. I don't pick it up and I'm like, kind of a thing. But sleep is the only thing where I lay down, I get in the specific position, I close my eyes, I take some deep breaths, and yet I'm not sleeping yet. It has to be something that falls upon us. And as people with insomnia can attest, toss and turn and do all these things to try and make it fall, but it doesn't. And that's this beautiful vision of sleep in the Bible, especially in Psalm 127. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it are in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, those who are watching watch in vain. It is in vain that you get up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep. And that little line there really emphasizes the fact that sleep is a gift of creation that God has given to us. And it is an illusion for us to think I'm the one that has to build my house. I'm the one that has to watch over my city. I'm the one that has to, get up extra early to hustle and, stay up late until my to-do list is done, because all that's going to benefit from that what you're going to reap is that anxious toil that it's talking about. And God's saying, like, or the psalmist, God through the psalmist is saying, hold on. Like, God has given you sleep. He cares for your sleep. And so that is a gift to receive. And I think that's the beautiful thing about our faith, is that it gives us this very different way of thinking about sleep, thinking of it as a spiritual discipline, what it's doing in my life. And yes, we can talk about all of the cool stuff with neuroscience and brain scans and all the cool health benefits and things of that nature too. But the two are connected. I think that we are body, soul creatures. And so those two things are interdependent, intertwined. And so God is doing something in our sleep. And the very practical thing, even I think it's in Jeremiah that he says, "At this I awoke and looked, and my sleep was pleasant to me." And just the fact that I wake up and my sleep is refreshing, like that is a beautiful gift that we receive.
Wow. I love that so much. That's such a beautiful framework to think through. It makes me think about sleep differently, which I think is part of your goal. It's like, hey, no, sleep is really spiritual. I don't know if I've ever thought that, but now I'm like, oh, of course it is. Yeah. I mean, and even the psalmist says, like, you make me lie down. You cause me to wake up. Like God is active in our sleep in a way where we don't have to be active. That makes me really happy. That's a great thought. I'm going to think about that all day. I want to talk a little bit about circadian rhythms, blue light from cell phones, and I want to talk about energy drinks. Oh, so and because I want to irritate people with this podcast, and so I'm gonna tell you a couple of things that I've learned and that I share with my clients, and then I'd love your thoughts on it. So one, that if we have our blue light from our phone, and that's the first thing we look at when we wake up, and it's the last thing we see when we go to bed, that blue light mimics sunlight, which then totally disrupts our circadian rhythm. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about that. But also, I've heard that 1 cup of coffee produces enough cortisol in women to be toxic for 24 hours. And at times, and that drinking one energy drink consistently every day increases your risk of sudden cardiac death tenfold. I heard a sleep doctor say that. That was mind blowing to me. And then he walked through between the cortisol and caffeine and all of that, how that is just that. If you continue to do that, that's toxic to the brain because it disrupts your sleep. It resets everything. So
go. So
let's tick people off.
Right. Let's go. Okay. Bad. Don't do any of it. Stop. No, I'm just kidding. I think some of that I agree with. I tend to be more of kind of a middle of the road approach. I think people kind of get lost in the ideal when it's not realistic. And so especially for a large portion of my career being active duty military, and I'm seeing young airmen, they're chugging like 5 energy drinks, operating on like 4 hours of sleep. And in a real way, like they have very little agency over their daily life and their schedules and the things that they have to do. And so they're just trying to kind of cope. And those are the things that they reach out for to cope with. And so there's an element of, okay, let's be wise about our fatigue mitigation and what we are doing. And so there's this ideal that I think, caffeine is probably one of the most abused substances in our culture today that's just accepted. And, we don't really think about the problems with that. For your circadian rhythm, there's actually evolving research that's showing that's kind of inputting into your circadian rhythm. So for people who aren't aware, you have your sleep pressure and your circadian rhythm. So your sleep pressure from the moment you wake up, your brain is kind of using energy. It's more complex than this, but I like to just talk about just adenosine because that's connected with caffeine. if you go back to your biology class in high school, then ATP is what our body uses for energy. And then one of those A's breaks off and it becomes ADP and adenosine. So that byproduct of adenosine that's building up, the cells sense that, and then it sends a signal to your body of like, I've got too much adenosine. We need to filter all this out. And so that's what sleep is doing, is it's recovering from those buildups that are happening in the brain and in the body. And so your sleep pressure, that is building. And then as you fall asleep, then that's going to kind of go down. Your circadian rhythm is the opposite. You can think of it as an activating rhythm. The easiest way to think about this is if you've been awake for 24 hours and then all of a sudden you get to mid-morning the next day, you may notice all of a sudden you're either not sleepy or you have like a slight like decrease in your sleepiness, which doesn't make sense because you've been awake for 26 hours now. So like, why aren't you just getting progressively more sleepy? And that is because you have this waxing and waning pattern that your body is going to be on the upswing and you're going to have more energy, more alertness, more awakeness at certain periods of the day. And so that is your circadian rhythm. And that is dictated by things like social interaction, movement, meals. And the strongest of all of those things is light. And so, yeah, exactly as you're saying, light definitely is going to be the main thing that like clobbers any of those other things that counteract. I'm often talking to people about that when they use melatonin as a supplement to help them fall asleep. Like if you're using melatonin and then you're on your phone like right afterwards, then you're not getting the best benefit from the melatonin, because melatonin is just a signal to your brain that it's dark. And then you have countered that by saying, no, it's light. So you're not actually getting the optimal benefit from your melatonin supplement. And that's really, I think I stay away from the language of hacks because they don't necessarily always get at the root problem for people's sleeplessness. But I think one of the most underutilized hacks for sleep is just turning all of your lights off. Literally, not just screens, but lights overhead, like everything. Just make it as close to dark as possible. I often am talking to people about getting those little cheap plug-in night lights that like turn on whenever the overhead lights go off. Like make it as dim as possible, and then try and sit in the dark for like an hour and see if you're not feeling sleepy. Like that is going to be one of the biggest things, because you think about before we had electricity or all of these things, it's dark, I can't do anything, and that is the natural response, is you're going to start feeling sleepy. So if I could ever just say one thing for people to do, just turn off your lights.
Yes. In The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, John Mark Comer, he talks about that before the invention of the light bulb, the average American slept 12 hours a night. Yeah. I'm like, that would be amazing. But now all of a sudden, because we have the synthetic light and because we can do all of this, then our lives have become increasingly more filled and hurried. And incidentally, it is harder to sleep. For Valentine's Day, I got my wife and I got us the greatest, and I would say probably the sexiest gift ever. We got weighted eye masks.
Oh, nice.
I was like, hey, you know what I want from you, for you this Valentine's Day, babe? I want sleep like that, but these weighted eye masks, they're crazy. They're like a weighted blanket for your face. Yeah. It's awesome.
That's true love.
Yeah. That's what marriage after 15 years looks like. It's like, hey,
we need a new vacuum.
Yeah. I got you something to wear for Valentine's Day. It's a sleep mask, perfect. Yeah. So this, you've got caffeine. Obviously, if you're drinking 4 Red Bulls or Monsters or whatever, that's a thing. You talk about the melatonin and then looking at your phone. If nothing else, you're listening to this podcast, you have trouble sleeping. It's not doing anything for you. I didn't realize that. And that's profound to me, that if if you're not darkening, you're not putting away your phone. First of all, I mean, especially if you're coupling it with social media, you're increasing your anxiety. All of your stress levels are going to go higher. But the idea too of just putting it all away, being in darkness, that's really important. Talk to me a little bit about with, with all of the stimulus that we have, and all of the noise, how important is quiet?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is going to be a big movement in the next 15, 20 years. Are people increasingly trying to find quiet and spaces of quiet, because there is so much noise that we are just bombarded with on a literal physical level. But then also because of that, and our days are filled with so much stuff, part of the reason why people come to me and they say, I just can't shut my mind off. My mind's racing. I'm thinking of all of these things. Part of that is because our days are so filled, we don't even have time to reflect and process on all of the thoughts that we have as we are trying to fall asleep. And so oftentimes, I think that's one of the benefits of truly just not just thinking of having a bedtime routine where like, okay, I'm doing all the typical stuff of hygiene and taking a shower and then laying out my clothes and getting ready for the next day or something like that. But where I'm truly drawing a line and I am entering into some kind of practice of I'm turning away from the day that I've had and towards tomorrow, that it is doing something in our brains, but also in our spirits and who we are becoming as people. That I have lived through this day and I've got a lot of stuff on my plate and all this stuff on my to-do list, and I cannot do anything else about that right now. Yeah. And so, a lot of people would just stop there and like, okay, I guess I need to try and fall asleep. But then us as Christians, then we take that to the one who can do something about that. And so, oftentimes I will hear people who have received this narrative that it is impossible for me to, shut off my mind, or that I can't break that at all. And certainly I don't want to underplay that there are people who have experienced trauma and real hurt and abuse that has given them very unique barriers to that and to regulating some of those intrusive thoughts and things of that nature. And so you need multiple disciplines to kind of come at that. Yeah. But I think more and more I'm hearing some of this helplessness to the flow of the thoughts that I'm having at the end of the day. And one of the things that it's a frequent thing I talk about in the book is it's really hard for your mind to be both anxious and have thanksgiving and gratitude at the same time. Yeah. And so trying to flip that of, let me think of 3 things that I'm thankful for. Sure. And any of these behavioral interventions I talk about in the book, I tell people it's not magic. We all want magic. We want a pill that's just an easy solution that I don't have to work at it. And that's part of the reason why behaviorism came out of, psychology, is because it doesn't require any introspection. All I have to do is just change my habits and my behaviors, and then I can get certain outcomes, which that sounds amazing. But the problem with the human heart is the heart, the interior life and what's going on within us. Yeah. And so oftentimes I think, is God just bringing us to these sleepless nights because we are ignoring what he's trying to do and reveal and work in our lives? That song on the Christian radio from the early 2000s of, what was it? What if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes to know you're near? That the blessings, that was it, by Laura Story in disguise. And really I think that is also part of that mindset shift that we see in the biblical narrative is oftentimes God disrupts people's sleep, to meet whatever end that is a mystery to us because God is so far above us. And so that can be, I am increasingly hearing stories of people who wake up and they feel a need to pray for a certain person. And then at the exact same time, this person's in some kind of life-threatening situation that you just really cannot explain that as just coincidence. And versus, people ignoring the barriers that they have in their life, that God has brought them to those things and is wanting to connect with them and wanting to, form them into the person that they need to be. And yet we are ignoring that.
It's almost like, that's an interesting thought too. Yes, waking up, knowing you need to pray for somebody, all of that. But what if you're not sleeping because God's trying to get your attention?
Yeah.
And he might be trying to tell you something, which, I think the kingdom of God is here and now in so many ways, just not the same as it will be when Jesus returns, which I understand. But I think heaven's always trying to get our attention. And so for me, there's a little bit of this connection to, the noise around us, the noise inside us, and then heaven trying to speak in. And the podcast, actually, episode before this one of the pastors in our churches gave a phenomenal teaching on silence and how God speaks and these quiet, really quiet, intimate moments. And so my mind is just kind of spinning through how does our sleep, how does the noise inside, the noise outside, how does that work against us? And maybe in those moments of disruption to sleep, God is saying, hey, I'm right here and I've got something for you.
Yeah. Wow. And I often say sleeplessness is a short-sighted sorrow. It's this, it's so hard when you are suffering to think of anything outside of beyond the present moment and right now, because that pain is so real. And so I don't want people to hear this and think that we're trying to bypass whatever it is that they are experiencing. It's that God wants us to bring those things to him. And, it's interesting talking to people who have walked this road and, they have managed their sleeplessness to a certain extent, but they still have seasons or periods of that and are faithful believers. And they will talk to me about this profound silence and quiet and stillness that you have in the night that just isn't present during the day. And that it almost feels more primed for that connection for these people compared to during the day, which I think is a lot to do with even just the ancient, monasticism, desert fathers and mothers. And there was a special kind of emphasis on being awake at night to pray and connect with God that I think we've lost a little bit of that in our modern hurry. I think entering into that silence and being able to just sit before God, it's almost like you get a mini retreat from all of life, even though you're not getting quote unquote the optimal level of sleep that you need, kind of a thing.
Wow. That comes back a little bit to the sleepover conversation of sometimes you're sleep deprived, but spiritually filled. That is a powerful reframe for especially and a perspective shift for a lot of people who, because you're typically like, oh, I can't sleep. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. And it's so negative. It's so charged. And yet if you are in a space of sleeplessness, could that be a divine opportunity to connect with God in a quiet moment that you would not have otherwise? Could that be in its own right a gift in that moment?
Yeah. And that might be the pathway back to sleep,
I was just going to say, and who knows, once that's activated, recognized, instead of being angry with yourself, step into the opportunity instead of saying, what's wrong with me? Why can't I sleep? Or I really wish I could sleep. And just saying thank you. that that I can have this moment with you, God.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really love it's a very short, little passage in Exodus as we're going through some of the law that God has given Israel. And it talks about if you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge that you're to give it back to him. And it says, for what shall he sleep in? And it shall come about that when he cries out to me, I will hear him, for I am gracious. And that law reveals God's character, that he does care for our sleep, that sleep is a unique suffering that we experience. And he cares about this person in their sleeplessness and not being able to get that. And so it not only is this beautiful moment of God cares for my sleep, so I can trust in that. And as I'm walking through my sleepless night, preach that to myself over and over again, that he's someone I can trust for that. But also it reveals this horizontal connection of if you look at other near ancient context and law codes, there's not really another place where someone who is in debt to another person in some way has a say of receiving back their collateral. Like that's not a thing, at all.
That's unique to the Hebrew scriptures.
Exactly. And so this connection of, am I somehow oppressing other people's sleep as well? Oh. So it kind of goes into that connection that's, I think, really important for us today of if I'm a good sleeper and I have no problems falling asleep, and there's someone in my circle who is experiencing sleeplessness, what could it look like for me to just say, hey, call me at 2 a.m. if you're suffering or something like that? Like, I have no problems falling back asleep. That's something easy for me. But like, I don't want you to be alone. I'm willing to give up some of my sleep so that way I can be in community with you. And that giving up of sleep, I think I would say that's always a sacrifice, an act of love. Like we see that with parents, newborns. Everyone who has had a newborn knows it is terrible. I often call it the fourth trimester as the first 3 months of life, because you're just like not getting any reprieve at all. And so if there are any parents of newborns, and I'm talking about the night being this mini retreat, obviously, no, you're not in a season of life where you can retreat from that. And it can be a really trying time and very difficult for you to even, think of are we ever going to get past this, kind of a moment. So I'm not calling upon you to give up your sleep or to do anything, because you're already experiencing that. It's as Christians, especially evangelicals, we're really great at meal trains. We love giving some casseroles to people for about 5 to 6 weeks. And then that's about it. And it's kind of on you. And so I think the scriptures give us this other view of sleep, of how is my neighbor's sleep actually connected to me? And so when in Deuteronomy, when that same law is being reflected upon again, it says, for when he returns the cloak, that he may sleep in it and bless you, and it will be righteousness to you. So that right relationship is this key component that we don't really think about that in the paradigm of how we talk about sleep today.
So, So I've got a friend who is struggling with sleep right now, just sleeplessness, and it's brutal. And I wonder what it would look like, even as you say, it's like, hey, for her husband, to say, hey, if you're up, I'm up. Let's be up together. Let's pray together. Cause, and I was really guilty of this when my wife was nursing and pumping up in the middle of the night. I tried getting up with her, and, I did a couple of times and then I didn't. My mindset was, well, one of us needs to have good sleep. One of us does. And now I listen to you and I was like, if I could go back in time, I'd probably do that different. I would, but hey, if you're up, I'm up. like,
Yeah.
and it's going to be all right. But what if that, what if that is the gift, and what if that's the trick? Not the hack necessarily, but what if that's part of it? It's like, hey, we're going to be up together, so you're not alone in this. I think that's beautiful. There are so many more things that I want to talk about, and we can't because we're out of time, which is annoying. And so I'm wondering too, I mean, I think we'll follow up on this, but I'd love to have you on the podcast again. This has been such a great conversation. I wonder if you could talk to the people who are, and I love your language of like, it is a suffering. I never really thought of that before, that sleeplessness is a suffering. Because you brought up the ancient desert fathers and mothers, and that they would choose suffering in a way to connect to God, and they would embrace suffering. If you could speak to the people who are suffering with sleeplessness right now, what would be your encouragement and your invitation to them?
Yeah. My encouragement would definitely be, you are not alone. That God in a very real way is present with you. And the beautiful story we get from Christianity is that we worship a God who never grows weary, never grows tired, never needs to sleep, and yet paradoxically has experienced sleep and sleeplessness in Jesus, and has experienced all the suffering and literally has taken all that suffering onto himself on the cross and died for our sins and rose again. And then by giving us the Holy Spirit, we have a true comforter who understands and empathizes with what we've gone through. Like, I feel like that is a little bit of a quip that we say of Jesus and the Spirit, but in this really beautiful way that's very explicit in the Gospels. And we see Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he is, so severely distraught and awake, and then yet his disciples are sleeping next to him. And so I think that there is this real thing that we can say, that God gets your sleeplessness and understands that, and is a source of joy and comfort and peace, even if tonight you don't necessarily get more sleep. And so I think that's the invitation, is how is God inviting me to connect and trust in him, and to experience the sleepless night as part of my spiritual life, as part of my walk with him. And that mindset shift might just be enough that it is able to help you kind of progress on your journey through the sleepless night. I tell people, my book's not magical. It's not going to all of a sudden give you 10 hours of like beautiful sleep. The education and the evidence and techniques in there are certainly going to help in certain parameters around sleep. But the whole goal of it is for us to put it back under the feet of God and just say, like, you have brought me to this night. You're going to see me through it. You're going to carry me through tomorrow. And I can trust that you actually care about my sleep.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much. As you were talking, and I'm just processing, there is that moment in Gethsemane where Jesus goes to his friends and he says, will no one stay awake? Like, will none of you stay awake with me? And that was always a curious statement for me. And now as you say that, Jesus is like, I can't sleep. I'm suffering. Will none of you stay up with me?
Yeah.
Like, couldn't you just join me in this? And just the sorrow that, in that. And I think that's a challenge for me, because sleep is not a problem for me. Yeah. I will sleep and I'm good, and I can typically fall back asleep and wake up. But I think a challenge for me, and for those of us who are good sleepers, like, who are the people in our lives that are sleepless or sleep deprived? And can we say, hey, you know what? I'll be up with you.
Yeah.
And you're not alone.
Even if there's not necessarily anyone in your immediate circle right now today, I have an activity in there that talks about gospel meditation that I think is such this beautiful invitation for us to connect with Jesus and moments of his life that we see in the Gospels. And so connecting with God and actually kind of trying to ask the Spirit to guide your imagination to really reflect on his experiences of sleeplessness in the garden, I can honestly say I have cried doing that multiple times, because it's in one way this profound sense of being seen in your sleeplessness, and at least for me, experiencing that seen and known and loved. But I would imagine for people who have no problems with their sleep, it would probably be a very different experience to really think about what Jesus was experiencing, and inviting that into your walk.
Wow. Ben, it is a privilege to listen to you and learn from you. I am so grateful that you would join the podcast. I really mean that. This might be my favorite episode. I just, there's so much revelation in sleep that you've shared with me that it's awesome. I'm wondering, love to give you a final word for those listening, and then we'll talk after the fact about getting you on the pod again.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I think this has been such an amazing conversation, and I think that it just invites us to reconsider what we have received from our culture and from the hustle. Like, everyone knows there's a problem. And I think sleep is just one of these tiny little areas where, as we kind of engage with the Bible, we see there's some other way that God is calling us to, as we're trying to follow the way of Jesus, that it requires a little bit of a reorganization. But I think more people are, I guess, for lack of better words, waking up to see some of that in the world around them. And it's not easy, and it's not immediate. It's not magic, but it's relationship. It's communication. It is connection with God in a way that maybe even a lot of life is not going to change, because you're in a season where you have multiple jobs, you're taking care of your children, you have a sick relative, or all of these things, and you don't even have the margin for sleep. And yet God can still work in that. Wow. And that's, I think, what we need is to invite God into those moments with us.
Wow. I'm so grateful for this. We're going to have your website on the show notes. We're going to have your book on the show notes so people can access that and find out more about what you've talked about here, which I love. And I'm just grateful that you be with us. That's all that we have for now. We will talk with you later.